Canada, spent 26 years in Alaska, and up to that point where I was an anthropology student at the University of Manitoba, and growing up in the woods of eastern Manitoba, the pine forests, where there were wolves and moose and ravens. Calling wolves with my 12-year-old voice across before it broke, I could enjoy having a pack stop on the ice and answer me back. And getting knocked out of canoes by moose, and just enjoying wildlife in general. I grew up wanting to be either a wildlife biologist or a forester, like Tom, a forester. And I didn't know much about Sasquatches until I became a teenager. And down at the lake, the cabin that we had, some of the guys who were working for the Department of Forestry, the forest rangers, were natives. And I've been learning a bit about native language, Cree language. Thank you for all the native people and First Nations who are here today. Thank you for sharing oral traditions with us and beliefs. It's hard to find anymore. A lot of the old stories are dying out. I was an Episcopalian, an Anglican, went to church, have my own beliefs about my Christian religion, but also about native religions and the world around us and spirituality, dimensionality. I try to integrate them. I try to take everything that everybody comes to me with and shares with me and put it together with my pieces of the puzzle to help me understand the world that we live in today and my experiences. I hope to share some of my personal experiences with you, and maybe more importantly, a select number of the thousands of reports that I've heard since I started investigating this as a physical therapist, working with natives in 1972 and 3 in Winnipeg, in Edmonton, with natives, as well as Victoria, BC, and then full-time on Vancouver Island from 1974 to 76, and with Comox natives in 1976, and with Carrier natives up in First Nations in Prince George and Vanderhoof, where I was a physical therapist and an EMT in 1977, 78, 79. I'm just trying to give you a bit of geography here where I worked. I traveled the states as a physical therapist, working in 14 states from 1988 until 1991, so 3 years of traveling and setting up clinics for hospitals. First thing I did was check with the natives. What's here? What do you believe about it? What should I do when I want to walk into the woods? How can I be polite? What do I need to do to show respect? And are there places I shouldn't go? I got married in early 92, late 91, and we had a little guy, already 2 years old. We didn't want to stay in Oregon. My ex was in the military, she was an MD, and the little duffer, he would go anywhere. We just wanted to get away from some of the dust in Eastern Washington, and Eastern Oregon. So we left and went to Alaska. We traveled all over Alaska until we decided where we wanted to settle and work for the Public Health Service, which was in Ketchikan. After visiting Kodiak, Dillingham, Bethel, the whole state, to travel around the state of Alaska takes some doing. Everywhere I went, I said, "What's your name for Sasquatch or Bigfoot? What do you believe about them?" With total respect, I said, I'm a white guy, what do I know? I know nothing. My grandparents have only been here a couple of generations. If I were to count on them to know where to go hunting or not to go, I might end up the wrong creek. Natives have been here a long time. They've acquired the hard way knowledge about how to conduct yourself in this world, how to hold yourself upright, where it's safe to go, how to tell when it's safe to go, who to go with. One thing I found out in Alaska with my patients, my native patients wouldn't let the kids out of the house in spring, summer, or fall in a lot of the places, especially the Athabascans, and we can go into that a little bit more. The respect they have for Bushmen, hairy men, in the Koyukon dialect of Dene people, it's Nakantlina or Nahu. I'm going to share with you some things that a colleague of mine, Richard Nelson, another anthropologist who lived for years with the Koyukon people, had to say about this, what the native people had to say to him about this. So we are just messengers, okay? Now, if you went to a church service, whether it's Methodist or Episcopal or whatever on a reservation these days, and you brought up this subject, somebody might say, that's
That's sacrilege, that's heresy. You can't talk about that here.
But I'm here to tell you that there's an important need to look at the whole environment that we've been gifted with and how to live in harmony with it, along with all the other good things we learn about, increasing our abilities to get along with other people. So it's not just about, it's not just about you, it's about everything around you. You want to be able to walk in safety, confidence, in nature. I also had a summer job spraying grizzly bears. It wasn't artistic at all. I tried not to spray them or get it on the German or Japanese tourists who were feeding them. This was a ranger job one summer. I can tell you about that after if you want. It was pretty funny. Anyway, we never killed any bears on my watch. A few of them had to leave looking kind of orange. It was important to make sure that the tourists had the right kind of respect for the grizzlies. They didn't. They thought it was a petting zoo. You can't suddenly teach a whole busload of visiting Japanese or Germans that those bears aren't domestic, they're wild animals. Let me talk about Alaska, okay? Really quickly, before we start. This is a reproduction of a British Columbian Kwakwakwa mouse, Kwakwakwa buckwheat mouse. It's a reproduction of an original that's probably not repatriated from Germany, a German museum, but should be. Tom Seawood is going to help me put hair on it like the original had. Big black hair, horse hair coming down. The teeth are even. I think that's important to notice. And it's a pretty human-like countenance. This is supposedly the small male husband of the female Tsunaquah. Okay, Tom talked about the big female child abducting Tsunaquah with the pursed lips. You go to downtown Seattle, or you go to the Museum of Victoria, and you'll see the big, or you read Emily Carr's books, or The Curve of Time, you'll read about these totems of these big black hair covered cannibal females, large drooping breasts, eyes are closed, lips are pursed. She whistles. The lips are always shown pursed. With the male, he's not. He's always just shown with this nervous looking grin. I guess it's because if your wife was a cannibal, you might look a little nervous too, right? The Tsimshian were the only tribal group I worked with, Prince Rupert area and also part of Southeast Alaska, who described their wild being, man-like being, as ape, monkey, Sasquatch, anything that imitates man, Babush, which is very similar to the word buckus. Linguists think that the Tsimshian Babush was a word borrowed from the Kwakwaka'wakw buckus. On Queen Charlotte Islands, Haida Gwaii, First Nations, Haida Gwaii, 2 islands, Moresby and Graham. The Northern Islands, Sovereign, First Nation, Haida, Canadian Haidas, and they've been there about 400, they've been in Alaska about 400 years. So those Haida people there, everybody's heard about the Haidas, but we don't want them visiting our village. Okay. Lots of slaves went up and down the coast between different tribal groups and so on. To the Haida, the wild hair-covered man-like figure in the bush was called the Gagit. And they were all thought originally to be lost human beings, as far as explanation goes, but they could grow up to be quite big and get quite hairy. Hair would grow over their body. So whether or not that's happened physiologically doesn't matter. It may have happened in a dimensional sense or in a metaphoric sense. I'm not going to explain it. I will tell you that Gagits were fairly solitary. They weren't known to be, in a clan or an extended family, although it would make perfect sense that they might well have been, even though natives might have, just First Nation members might have only seen them in a solitary situation. They were the inhabitants of the seashore and the forest, and so they lived on seafood, mussels, clams, limpets, sea urchins. And if you eat the sea urchin and you're shaking the eggs down, okay, what's going to happen is sooner or later you're going to screw up and you're going to get one of those painful spots in your hand or in your lips. And when the native Charles Edenshaw, famous Haida carver Charles Edenshaw, sculpted this, carved this around 1899, I believe, and the American Museum of Natural History has this particular Gagit mask. So this is also a Gagit, just a different expression of it. They believe that these creatures would live, these beings, these wild beings, would live along the seashore. I'm not going to talk about the Tlingit because that's like the Navajo shape-shifting being. One quick word. Margaret Peradovich was an ancient, venerable, wonderful woman who really helped natives in Alaska. She helped natives nationwide for quite a bit, especially in regard to healthcare, establishing equality with healthcare and education. Even though she was a Tlingit, all other Alaskan tribal groups really respect and honor and revere Margaret Peradovich, who passed away, sadly, only about 2 years before I left Alaska. I think when I was playing pipes for her, I had an opportunity at a memorial, to chat with 3 of her granddaughters, whom I knew anyway from having been in the community as a physical therapist and playing pipes at weddings and stuff like that. Nina Fleury, Nina Peradovich, Kathy Yates, and Brenda Least. If you watch Monsters and Mysteries of Alaska, you might have seen one of these women. If you watch BFRO's Finding Bigfoot, Alaska's Bigfoot Island, you might have seen Brenda Least talking about, if you see one, if you count yourself lucky, say a prayer. You know, she's talking about one she'd seen on Prince of Wales Island. They all had interesting experiences with their grandmother on one particular occasion. Grandma, Kushtaka's her land-daughter man. That's the soul-stealing, shape-shifting, could be Sasquatchy kind of creature. It's the only thing that we really had after World War II in Tlingit language that matched the Sasquatch. So the girls all asked Grandma Peradovich, Grandma, are Sasquatches and Kushtaka's the same thing? And Grandma Peradovich looked at them and she said, yes and no. And the girls just looked at the grandmother and said, okay. How can that be? I think they called her Auntie, even though she's a grandmother, because they called every other woman in the village Auntie. She said, well, a Sasquatch is a Sasquatch, but a Kushtaka can be anything it wants. And that's very similar to the Navajo view that there are good and there are bad. And I've always thought that about the edges of our population, or human population. There's always some folks who are like absolute wonderfully gifted people. You think they could maybe perform miracles. Albert Schweitzer, Madame Curie, all sorts of wonderful people. In every community, there's always somebody who's just amazing. And there's other people that you might not want to run into. Anyway, I just wanted to share that intro. Can we flip to the... Yeah. So, this was the first cover 2 years ago of a book on behavior, Sasquatch behavior. It's like 28 Sasquatches you could meet in heaven. It's more like typical things and some unusual things that I know they do all over the continent, but aren't widely known, okay? Things you might not easily believe, but I can attest, having researched this for a long time, as both a clinician, an anatomy professor, and an anthropologist, and a trained investigator, that they actually do. So my first book became this book, and I've facilitated the actual behaviors with Chapter 6, Run Off the Mountain, Sasquatch Behaviors. So I've subtitled it, Chasing People with Restraint. That's where you stop, he stops. Okay? So you might get stones or rocks thrown at you as you move off the mountain or off the trail, but you're not being physically attacked, physically hit or charged. It's like, scoot, we need you out of here. Sometimes there's whistling, sometimes there's calling back and forth, and the location given in this report. Here to walk Prince of Wales Island. Let's go through that right now, please. So, Revilla Island and Prince of Wales Island are steep and rugged. A lot of Southeast Alaska looks like this. If you were a Sasquatch and you had seafood on the menu 24/7 and there was venison in the woods, fern roots in the wintertime, and blueberries, salmonberries, cloudberries at other times of the year, huckleberries, it'd be a good place to go. Next, please. The rainfall, by the way, it is about 170 inches. It's about 17 feet in Ketchikan, and it's about 19 feet this year, so it's up. The average temperature in Ketchikan in the wintertime, it averages about 33 degrees. So it'll dip down overnight, but it'll always melt during the day. And snow only lasts for a couple of months, and it melts each morning. Right there, we'll go back one, just one screen, please. So the climate is southeast Alaska, and I wish I had my pointer. This gray arm here, yep, thank you, is southeast, and it feels like coastal Washington. Boreal is like, up in Glacier National Park. Subarctic, it's kind of like tundra, like the Arctic. You got a lot of open muskeg, open ponds, muskeg bogs, floating bogs, Labrador tea, sphagnum moss, and caribou will be running up and down in there. Moose in the boreal with caribou. Arctic has caribou only. Sheep, mountain sheep throughout, and goats in the gray areas. Sea lions all along this gray coastal area. The Athabascan people live in the boreal. The Inupiaq, they're Eskimoan speaking, live in the Arctic. Subarctic has essentially Yupik Eskimoan people. So they speak a different language completely from the Arctic Eskimo, the Inupiaq. Those Arctic Eskimos speak a Canadian, the same dialect, almost the same language that the Eskimoan people, the Inuit of Canada and the Polar Eskimo of Greenland speak. And they're seal hunting, but also hunt migrating caribou. All these people have Sasquatch-type oral traditions, okay? And I can't take you all across the state of Alaska or condense it all in really quickly, but I'll try to do a little bit as we go tonight, and then answer questions. Next one. So you can see the Inupiaq, the Eskimoan people. Their word for giant, giant, hairy, and scary guy. Nothing good about it. The central Yupik, the navy blue, there are a million stories. Hairy man is the name that most of the Athabascan pink, red area peoples talk about. That pink and red is a language family that the Navajo speak, and even some coastal Pacific Northwest people are related in language to the Athabascans. I'm not sure which one, but somewhere around here. It's unusual to find exactly the same. All those three Alaskan languages, by the way, have the same word for raven, yit, and the same word for eagle, cha. And of course, those are moieties in society. If your mom was a raven, you got to marry an eagle, okay? And if your wife's an eagle and she's living there, and you're a raven guy, and you've just moved in, you're gonna settle down where she's at, because she knows where the berries are at. She knows the land. She knows where the good, ocean harvesting is. You're a fisherman and hunter, you can pretty well go anywhere that's supposed to drop us guys out on the ocean and we'd be good. We'd be good at whatever. This is what my patients in Alaska are still living. The Ayak, the Tlingit and the Ayak, Tsimshian and Haida. If you take all that pink and red and run it right across to Hudson Bay, where I went to school, University of Manitoba, polar bears up there, moose, caribou, it's the same sort of environment. Next, please. Islands with the most sightings. On the left, Prince of Wales Island, and this is only because the most reported sightings, you could multiply the hundreds of reports I have by 10 again. Anytime you go there, it's kind of like going to Tahola. Everybody in Tahola has either seen a Sasquatch or has seen tracks or knows somebody that is right comfortable with the whole thing. In other words, none of the kids are trying to hoax it. There's not that Yaakov Washington type mentality. Take it seriously, which is something that they should do, and they listen to their elders. They listen to their grandparents and they respect them. It's fantastic. So that island on the left, Prince of Wales Island, has Haida on the southern half and Tlingit on the northern half. Craig, Alaska is on the left in the middle. Hollis, where the ferry from Ketchikan comes, is right about at the arrow, just a little bit north. You had an inlet. There you go, that's Hollis. And there's a road across the middle of the island and another road that goes up and down. Revilla Island, yep, in the Narrows. Go up to that thin Narrows, a little further to the left, up, left. There you go, that's it. That area, that's the bridge to nowhere. No, sorry, folks, you don't need a bridge to an airport. You know, Grandma's not having a heart attack that bad, is she? We're going to use this as a political football and give all your money to folks in Louisiana who need Hurricane Katrina rehab. Okay, that was the bridge to nowhere, and that's Ketchikan. And a lot of these stories have come from that island. Next, please. Still has no bridge, but you know what? You could shoot a bow and arrow across. You could shoot an arrow across the narrow. So this is Gohee. This is another carving by a native friend of mine, Alicia Timberman. And you can see some similarities here, right? Especially she's left in the toothpicks that describe they depict the sea urchin spines that these beings eat, because they'll take deer, they'll take salmon, but they're also living year-round on seafood. There's even a theory by Joe Beelard of Oregon and some of the researchers here that our Sasquatches, in the wintertime, they'll find a way to cut across to the coast. They're not taking Washington State ferries, but they can swim. And they'll go. They've been reported on Hartstein, they've been reported up at Port Townsend, there are tracks. There's all sorts of evidence that they do move to the coast in the wintertime. Some may not need to. They can just hole up. Next, please. Woody Anderson, who was a patient of mine at one time, had a really upsetting experience along with his son Gary. I knew his sister, who was in the driver's seat at the time, on a hunting trip on Prince of Wales Island. This was dramatized in Monsters and Mysteries of Alaska, which was a Discovery Channel production that you might be able to dig up on YouTube, and you can listen to what Woody has to say about this. Woody was asleep, big thunderstorm at Staney Creek, so they moved over to Eagles Crest Campground, and it was about 1 a.m., pitch black. It was near Control Lake in October 2005. I'm going to read it to you, okay? His son Gary was in the back seat. I interviewed them separately. Woody, in the documentary, he was pretty scared when he was describing it, recounting it. You could see the sweat popping out, and you could see his eyes. He was sincerely traumatized by the event. And he's a big guy. He's like a Seattle Seahawk. He's a super hunter. So it was something. Woody's words. I'd gone to Staney Creek area north of Kloak on west central Prince of Wales Island with my son Gary and my sister Gina for our usual week of deer hunting in the last week of October 2005. We left Wednesday the 26th, and because of really nasty weather, we turned back in car camp that week at Eagles Nest Campground, just east of Control Lake, smack dab in the middle of Prince of Wales Island. It's a little Forest Service campground. We were pulled off in the parking area just before the bridge there and had the whole campground to ourselves. Not even a campground host. It had been raining and blowing Friday night so badly we couldn't get a tent up, and so we went to sleep. We were asleep in the car. My son in the back seat, and I was stretched in the back passenger seat, in the front passenger seat. My sister Gina was asleep, reclined back in the driver's seat. The moon had come out around 2 a.m., and Gary had just woken up and was saying something. I blinked and looked out the front windshield to see 3 large hair-covered faces peering in through the right side of the windshield and the passenger window on my side. They were leaning over and looking in. Gary doesn't drink or do that. Woody doesn't drink or do drugs. Whole family, extremely devout guy. The tallest was about 7 feet or so and had his hand resting on the hood in front of my sister. The other large one looked to be a female who was looking in my passenger window and was holding a young one in her arms. She appeared to be about 6 feet or so in height and was holding a young one who was also looking in. Now, if you watch the YouTube documentary, you may know that they don't depict that. They edited that part out. They didn't actually go to the work of dramatizing that. As Woody made me draw under his supervision, and Gary. I couldn't hear any noises, Woody said, from outside, but their faces showed curious expressions, and their eyebrows were going up and down. The adults both had hair over what I could see of them from the waist up, and it appeared to be about 4 inches in length, except around the eyes and nose. The hair looked just like a Yorkshire Terrier's. You know, the brindled color, a combination of brown and black and gray. Gary was sitting up looking for about 45 seconds, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw him flip back down and pull the blankets back up over his head. Gina was still sleeping in the driver's seat and she didn't wake up. Woody continued, my initial reaction was a total amazement. I was just lying back there, staring back at them as they were leaning in and peeking in the front and the right front windows. As I gradually realized what I was looking at, it all hit me. And I'll tell you, I let out a holler. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was frightened. At a distance of less than 3 feet, there was never any question that these three creatures could be bears, but rather some kind of wild, man-like creatures. The little one wasn't looking surprised. It just seemed to be paying attention to what the two big ones were doing. I was wondering what it was that they found so curious. When I hollered, Gina woke up and said, what's the matter? Are you all right? I turned to look at her and I said, I think I just saw 3 acoustic cars looking in the window. Woody's family is Hyde on his mom's side and Tlingit on his dad's side. I believe I was still wrestling with the surprising reality of what I just witnessed, and not sure what my boy might have seen or how my sister might react, playing it down and saying, I must have had a nightmare. It wasn't until the next morning that I really came to grips with what I'd actually seen. Early the next morning, we went up looking around the huckleberries for a morning snack, and I hadn't said anything more to my sister Gina or to my boy, but Gina called out, hey, come look at this. We were all looking at a big, wide, 15-inch track with 5 toes in the ground back in the bushes behind the outhouses. And then I said to them, it must have been from what I saw last night. I saw them last night too, Dad, my son said. What? Gina exclaimed, are you letting me go outside on my own just now? She got really upset at him. We didn't hear or see anything more of the creatures on our hunt. Once we got back going in the hunting mode, we didn't talk about it no more until we got back to Ketchikan with the winter's venison. Woody added thoughtfully, although some Southeast Alaskan Tlingits believe in such creatures as Kushtikas or Sasquatches, others will just laugh. But for me, seeing is believing. Looking back at it now, Woody continued, I'd have to say that although it was frightening, I don't recall at any time feeling like they meant us harm. Gary confirmed his father's impression of the creature's body hair. It was just like a Yorkshire Terrier's, but shaggy and kind of silky. He also said he'd seen 2 big ones and a little one in the arms of one of them. They had exactly the same stories. And they had the same, when they had me draw it, they had me draw the same thing. So that's my sketch under their supervision. Gary said that I had to duck back down and pull the blankets over me and I didn't move. So anyway, that's that. That they go in families, that was not generally commonly thought. I mean, Albert Ostman, the kidnapped prospector, the Swedish prospector in British Columbia in 1929, gave me a new story, Queen Elizabeth, he'd been picked up in a sleeping bag and carried up. Can we go with the next one? So, I mean, that was a family that Ostman got dumped off to live with for a couple of days, B&B up in the mountains, kind of a primitive B&B. So that's the sketch of the adult male Sasquatch reported looking through the front windshield that Woody described, Woody Anderson's car window on Central POW Island in October 2005. And he had me redo that. That actually looks kind of like, if you took an anthropology textbook and looked at Java Man or Peking Man, what's that, 200,000 years old? Or right up to 40,000 years ago, according to anthropologists. The scientific name for that is Homo erectus, our first human, quote-unquote, ancestor, according to anthropologists. In fact, when I spoke with Dr. Mel McKetchum of the DNA Project, to whom I'd given here through David Paulides, one of 20 samples that actually turned out to be very, very good, she told me. Out of the 101, we got a lot of data. By the way, her research was good. That was an excellent DNA project with really good labs, really good fieldwork. She concluded that Sasquatches have female mitochondrial DNA, human female mitochondrial DNA, archaic human autosomal DNA, so the mixture from mom and dad that gets blended and stirred up into the omelet, that's both, it looked like at least there was some archaic human DNA, and by archaic, that means you couldn't identify the species, it wasn't Neanderthal, but there was a suggestion that it was something like what Homo erectus might have looked like. There are people that say we're missing 2 chromosomes that have been genetically, surgically excised from us at some point. That some geneticists could go back in time and say, hey, that seems to have happened 120,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or 20. They could put dates and time on it, depending on whether you're a biblical scholar or you're, a hardcore geneticist. Somewhere in the last 120,000 years, the human body has lost 2 of its autosomal chromosomes. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry. All the great apes have 2 more than you or I. We just have 46, total of 23 pairs. So, where they went, you kind of know the Y chromosome was involved, and there was a bit of, it almost looks like genetic engineering, it really does, so I'm not going to go more on that. There's all sorts of late night documentaries on Amazon that you can watch that will describe, chariots of the gods and things like that. The trick is to try to find a reference to that in any scripture of whatever religion you follow. And it may be that you can do that. Let's go to the next one, please. If you go to Alaska, you've got to go to, Ward Lake, walk around Ward Lake. And if you're doing that, your spouse might want to go fishing at Connell Dam. So, the nurse that I know went to Connell Dam to hike the trail. And she took her camera, and her husband was fishing at Ward Lake. And they're only a mile apart. So, drop off, come back, pick up. She was fishing, or she was walking along the trail, and she heard a sound in the bush. She thought, I'll get a picture of it. It's a deer, right? Well, kind of get ready. So she couldn't see it right away, but she thought maybe it's in there, and if I take the shot, I can look at it later and find it, right? Well, when she took the shot, there was a scream, and this is what she got. Okay? Now, to me, that's not a stump. To me, that's a heavy, slump-shouldered, muscular, maybe a senior, aging male Sasquatch walking this way. That's what I see. Okay? I know it's fuzzy. There's a thoracic kyphosis. That head neck angle is perfect for a lot of the photographic evidence that I've seen for Sasquatch, for adult male Sasquatches. Okay? Next, please. Gord Guthrie lives in Heidelberg. It seems like half the people in Heidelberg have seen Gageets. So they're on the south end of Prince of Wales Island. And it's kind of like the Hola. It's not really, oh yeah, I saw another Gageet on Sunday. What's it doing? Oh, it was like the other ones at the garbage dump that Freddie and his family saw. It was just behaving like that or whatever. It's so commonplace. It's not like, oh, you saw what? Sasquatch? It's different place and time. So Heidelberg's pretty cool for anybody wanting to check out Sasquatches. What Gord said was, as I came past the Heidelberg logging road, which is gravel off of the blacktop, I looked over through the passenger window because I was going back to co-op. I looked out the passenger window, and what I saw was a female Gageet sitting up, just 20 yards, not even up the road, and her little guy is doing a somersault. He's rolling down the gravel road, head over heels, holding on to what looks like, I swear, the blue top of an Ace Hardware 5-gallon plastic bucket. Like a discus, He hit the brakes, he backed up. The trees were still swaying, they had moved into the bushes. What I've heard is from a lady in the Queen Charlotte who doesn't know about this. She came out onto her porch one night because she heard, Mama, Mama, from the back, porch. So she thought, I'll switch on, it's got to be somebody's kids. She switched on the porch outdoor light as she opened the door, and she says there was a little hair-covered creature about not 3 feet tall. And to get off the porch, it was so shocked and surprised, she said, it did reverse somersaults. It just rolled back down off and ran off into the forest. So somersault behavior, kind of interesting. Albert Austin talked about Sasquatch kids up at Tope Inlet when he was up there, kidnapped by them. He said they would sit on their bum, the boy and the girl, and grab their feet and see how far they could hop on their derrieres She's hopping along on the ground. So there's that kind of behavior reported too. Next, please. Now, well, I've seen a Sasquatch at dusk and one at night. The one I shone a flashlight on, and it's described in this book, behaved like, oh geez, you know, and it turned and pivoted and it was gone. It did not like the flashlight. And that was at about a distance from me to you, sir. Okay. Can you stand up? Okay. I'm 5'10". This was about 7.5 feet tall. Can you raise your arm up over your head? How tall are you, sir?
6 foot.
Okay, and another 1.5 foot, so not full extension on the arm. Little, yeah, just a few. That'd be a little bit more maybe. So that's about what I'm looking at. And he's wide like this. I'm thinking there was no stump there last night, and then it turns and it's gone. But it was reddish, and the legs were the legs were like fire hydrants, but they were big and they were massive and they were covered with a reddish hair. So it took off. This Sasquatch, or Gagee, was also on Prince of Wales Island, and there's one guy in the back seat and his girlfriend. And they're all kind of related. I mean, the rest of the family's related. The daughter was at the wheel, cousin in the back seat, mom in the passenger seat. Okay, time?
5 minutes.
All right, thanks. Basically, it had been walking across the highway, following some deer, and it was steaming. It was big and gray and lanky like a basketball player. But it's like, its attitude, they told me, half of the bus, half of the van wanted to stop. The other passenger said, no, you know, it's a gee, we got to get the hell out of here, right? So even in a native community, there's not universal attitudes that are the same. And I don't blame the ones who said, let's go. But they could have reached out and touched it, Violet told me. It was really that close. It seemed almost sick. Okay, and it was gray in color. So maybe it was an older one. The deer had just crossed in the fog just in front of the vehicle, and they had to slow for it. Next, please. Rock throwing. It's reported everywhere. When those rocks can be thrown from 100 yards and land right in the middle of the boat and not bounce around again, something's a little bit weird, okay? We've always just looked at the rock throwing, branch throwing stuff as, oh, it's following the laws of high school physics, Newton physics. Yeah, maybe, or maybe most of the time, but not always. Okay, there's a fringe percentage of throwing behavior. It's just way weird. It's like it's being teleported, but they didn't plop like that. Next, please. You'll have to get details from my book. When the 3 women, this is in Raincoat Sasquatch, and they needed therapy. The one who slept through, the mother who slept through it all, they were sleeping in the picnic shelter. They got fined for it later because they'd seen a Sasquatch in the campsite and they'd driven around the evening before. They'd driven around to avoid it. Have you read how many people have read Raincoat Sasquatch? Do you recall reading the story of the women in the shelter?
I do.
Okay. They thought they'd be safe. They were a mile away on the other side of the lake. And so they were feeling really cool about it. And they had their kids. Kids are still in sleeping bags. They just sort of threw the kids back into the corner of this picnic shelter, okay? And but there it was, dragging the axe around. If that wouldn't give you a conniption fit. And it just sort of, I can't remember if they found the axe or not. They steal stuff, but they bring it back. And it's that way from California to Alaska to BC. Next, please. Usually bring it back. Oh, this dumpster, if you go to catch can, you can see where the Sasquatch lifted it to get at the garbage inside, and the fingerprints I found were right on the top. So it's one of those 400-pound double wides. And Mr. Milne, who saw it, next please, Mr. Milne, who came out of his house at 1 o'clock in the morning and watched this, couldn't believe it, he thought it was a bear. The Clinkets have their stories about Kushikas being soul stealers who will come to the aid of a shipwrecked or lost wood person, feed them, kind of like maybe feed them wild food, and steal their soul, so that that person can become one of them, one of the Kushikas. But during the linguistic Reformation, you know, when native words got washed out of mouths with soap in the 30s and 40s and 50s, especially at Sheldon Jackson School in Sitka, all the Tlingit words, the Tlingit language essentially died until it was resurrected by Dr. Esther Shea and a Tlingit elder from Sitka years later. The name for that is Hootslag, which in Tlingit means foot big. Next, please. That's all before Patterson Gimlin. All that happened before Patterson Gimlin and Elton Bigfoot. More shots of Alaska. Next, please. The strangest story ever told. Read about it. Really weird. And why people I know who were commercial fishermen refuse to go there ever again. Next, please. Yeah, again, this sort of thing is being reported. You shot your deer, or just as you're about to shoot it, this dude jumps down into the forest, grabs it, and it's gone. And these things aren't even talked about because people just say, oh yeah, you're just trying to make an excuse for not bringing home the deer, right? You know. Next, please. They have no fear. They'll run right in front of a vehicle. And it's almost like they're counting coup, like the Sioux warriors and Lakota warriors would do. It's almost like, nah. And this guy had just shot a deer. And before he could get out of the vehicle, the Sasquatch ran in front of the vehicle right to where the deer was, into the bushes. And by the time he and his uncles had the guts to go out and get it, it was gone. Next, please. We're going to do real fast through. No time. Okay, well, please take a little time to look at this book and catch up on the rest of the story.